Welcome back to another video lecture on AP US history. Today we're diving into the evolution of US political relationships with Central America and the Caribbean from the end of World War II to today. But first, let's rewind a bit for some historical context. Back in 1823, the Monroe Doctrine was introduced, declaring that the Western Hemisphere was off limits to further European colonization. This bold move laid the groundwork for the U.S. to assert control over Latin America. Fast forward to 1898, when the U.S. annexed Hawaii, despite clear resistance from Queen Laleokalani, who tried to push back using American legal principles. While Hawaii isn't part of Central America, this moment reflects a larger trend of the U.S. using its power to dominate smaller, less powerful nations, especially when it benefited American interest. So what does this all mean? Leading up to the 20th century, U.S. involvement in the region was defined by military power and economic self-interest, and although American rhetoric often championed democracy and freedom, the reality was far more complex. This pattern of influence didn't end with the 19th century, it simply evolved. Although the United States has promoted democratic ideals and economic development in Central America and the Caribbean since World War II, its actions are oftentimes driven by strategic interest and economic gain, resulting in inconsistent and coercive political relationships.
After World War II, U.S. involvement in the region increased, mainly to stop the spread of communism during the Cold War. A major example came in 1954, when the CIA helped orchestrate a coup in Guatemala, overthrowing the democratically elected president, Jacobo Arbenz. The U.S. claimed to be defending democracy, but in reality, it was defending corporate interests, specifically those of the United States, which had strong ties to the U.S. government. This behavior gave rise to the term Banana Republic, and no, I'm not talking about the clothing store. The U.S. continued to support right-wing regimes, such as those in El Salvador and Nicaragua, as they aligned with anti-communist goals, even if the governments committed serious human rights abuses. After the Cold War, the U.S. shifted from military intervention to economic control. For example, CAFTA-DR, a trade agreement signed in 2004 between the U.S., the Dominican Republic, and Central American countries, deepened economic ties. The benefits were disproportionate, however, favoring U.S. corporations working with communities in their countries involved. More recently, U.S. involvement has centered on immigration control and drug trafficking. Aid and diplomacy are often used to pressure governments to cooperate. But the U.S. claims these are partnerships. The U.S. clearly seems to hold them.
Okay, so since 9/11, U.S. foreign policy has increasingly focused on security and border control. Programs like the Merida initiative going from 2007 to 2021 and the Alliance for Prosperity aim to fight drug trafficking and reduce migration by funding things like law enforcement and development in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. These programs were supposed to reduce corruption and improve conditions, but in reality, critics say they often strengthened corrupt governments and militarized policing rather than addressing the root causes of migration like poverty and violence. At the same time, U.S. foreign aid is often used as leverage, threatened or withheld depending on whether a government complies with the U.S.'s relationship. Even though the U.S. publicly promotes democracy and development and often prioritizes domestic concerns like border security above all else, the countries in Central America and the Caribbean aren't reaching their full economic potential in part because of how the U.S. treats them. So, while we may hear the language of cooperation, in reality the relationship is still imbalanced, driven more by U.S. interests rather than true mutual respect or cooperation. Alright, so what are our takeaways? Well, for one, while American leaders often speak about promoting democracy and freedom, U.S. involvement in Central America and the Caribbean has largely been driven by strategic and economic interests, from overthrowing democratic governments to securing favorable trade deals. Genuine partnerships have rarely been the priority. Number two, during the Cold War, stopping communism became a major justification for U.S. interventions, such as the 1954 coup in Guatemala. These actions often supported authoritarian regimes, aligned with U.S. goals, even when those governments committed serious human rights abuses. And number 3, even after the Cold War, the U.S. continues to exert control through economic agreements and conditional aid programs. Initiatives aimed at reducing migration and crime often reinforce corruption and militarization instead of solving root problems, keeping Central America and the Caribbean economically and politically dependent on the U.S. Alright, see you in class.